Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, we're going to be going over the Mirror Arrow, Blink Arrow full build showcase for the Necromancer. Now, this build has been amazing, but the first thing I want to ask is the question of the day. How are you guys doing? What are you guys up to? Like, how's been your Path of Exile League? Mine has been absolutely wonderful. Like, how many Sanctums have you done? Have you done a bunch of them? Have you only done a few? Have you only cleared a few? Please let me know down below because I want to know for analytical purposes. Now, for the build, I want to preface this. This build is very, very, very tuned towards two very specific kinds of content, okay? It's tuned towards map rushing, and it's tuned towards sanctum rushing. The whole point of this build is to do maps as fast as possible, to flip through them, right? And then, of course, to do sanctums as fast as possible, which it also does. That is it. That is the whole point of the build. It can do uber bosses. You can refine it to do uber bosses easier, right? But in its current state, it can do uber shaper pretty easily, as that's one of the easier ones. But for the other ones, I would heavily suggest investing into some other stuff, other defenses, because to make it better for bossing, there would be a lot of things I would change, including like ailment immunity. But in the Sanctum, ailments aren't a problem, so I completely ignore ailment immunity in favor of just going for Sanctum related things, like going really fast, right? So I just want to let that you guys know that this is very specific towards a very specific kind of content. So if you're expecting it to do this, like A, it's not going to do A, it's going to do B, i.e. sanctum rushing. Now, what are my stats with it so far? Right now, it's about 130 to 2 minute average per map with beast rushing, sanctum rushing. So you just go into the map, look for beasts, and then find the sanctum, and then leave. It is very, very profitable right now. Nobody knows about it, so I'm making a lot of currency because of it, so woohoo, good for me. But TLDR, we also have I think it's like a 4 to 5 minute floor time for the Sanctum average. I went through all my footage that I've collected so far. It's about like 5 minutes per floor at most, depending on the floor, depending on like if I have reduced movement speed. But the whole concept is to just go through the Sanctum as fast as possible to make as many Sanctums as possible. So I just have a relic set up where I have additional runes shown, and I also get a little bit of inspiration on Affliction, and that's enough because I have so much damage, it doesn't matter. I am getting close to like 16 to 20 million DPS, depending on how many clones I have out as possible. I am averaging this with like 20 clones because that's around where I usually have in a boss fight. But you can have more, you can have less. You can actually upgrade to like the Stampedes and even have more, but I preferred the Suppress on my boots instead. Now, overall, the idea of the build is we are building around Mirror Arrow and Blink Arrow. They essentially have the same amount of stats, they just work a little bit differently gameplay-wise. Blink Arrow makes you go to the location you fire, and then Mirror Arrow shoots a clone at the location. So this combined, it allows you to have an insane amount of maneuverability while doing maps, while also doing the Sanctum as well. And it also, of course, gives you a lot of damage because you have 20 minions. And those minions, they use your bow and your quiver for their base stats. And that allows us to make a really nasty bow and do a lot of freaking damage. Now, one thing I would heavily suggest getting early on is a +1 arrow on the quiver. That is very important for making the build feel good clearing-wise. We could make the build into a delirious farmer very easily by investing into a synthesis explode bow. Thanks to the fact that your minions get the stats on the bow, it will get the explode on the bow, like the synth implicit. That would be cool. But I didn't really feel like investing into that because, like I said, that's not the content I was doing with this build. And that's the beautiful thing about Path of Exile is builds like this can exist because of the fact that there's so many different kinds of content. And the Sanctum is really the league that this build really does it shines significantly because of the nature of the mechanic where you just want to be doing it as fast as possible. And of course, beast farming is very good with it as well, because like you see a beast, you kill it, you don't see a good beast and you move on. And Blink Arrow makes going through maps very quick. It's kind of like Palestrin's build, the lightning warp setup where you're doing map rushing. It's very similar to that, but instead of lightning warp as our damage delivery mechanism, mirror arrow, blink arrow is. We're doing mainly two types of elemental damage, lightning and fire, with more towards lightning. Then of course we're using stuff like LE equilibrium, and of course curses to reduce the enemy's resistance, and that gives us a lot of damage as well. Just adding elemental weakness almost doubles the damage of the build, thanks to the fact that we have an ashes. Speaking of ashes, for equipment that I would have before playing the build, I would get the bow, right? The bow setup. I would get the quiver, and I would get, of course, the amulet, the ashes. Why is that? Well, with Phantasmal, Mirror, and Blink Arrow, you get a bunch of extra charges, right, as their alt quality, right, some extra charges. And if you don't have an ashes, then you don't have as many charges, and it's really awkward to use beforehand. But you can play it before an ashes. It's just, like I said, I wouldn't play the build without an ashes, in my humble opinion. But like 20 divines plus however much the bow, like that's not really that much of an entry cost. This build actually ends up being very cheap in the end, because you don't really need much to farm the Sanctum, and you don't really need much to T16 beast farm. And the fact that I was able to do Uber Shaper astounds me. I didn't even think that this build could do it, considering like my defenses aren't as good. But turns out Progenesis is about as OP as people make it out to be. It is insanely strong for the ball phase. So woohoo, right? Now, if I were to get a Mage Blood, which I'm very close to, by the way, thanks to beast farming, this build is very fast at farming, and it's about to get me my Mage Blood after about 2 days of farming. If you put on a Mage Blood, you'll be a lot more Uber viable. It'll be a lot easier to do Ubers. You can, of course, get ailment immunity with like Purity of Elements or something like that. You can improve the bow, get an explodey bow for map clear. This is a very utilitarian build, and it can fit a lot of different niches as long as you're willing to, of course, upgrade the build properly. If I wanted to make this into of course, a boss build, or like an invitation farmer, I would definitely put on a Mage Blood and slap on some defensive flasks, and you should be good to go. And then if you want to like clear like T16s with like Delirium and stuff like that, like Legion, stuff like that, maybe not Legion, I'm not entirely sure about Legion, but yeah, like if you want to do like map farming, like actual map farming where you like do pack size farming with like altars, I would heavily suggest an Explode Bow, as it would make this feel a lot better. Yeah, that's pretty much it for the intro. This is going to be a long video where I detail through everything in the build, so get ready, get comfortable. If you see on the screen right now, this is the POB. If you want to type that out, you can also go to my profile as well. I plan on making another update video on this when I get of course, the Mage Blood. And as well, you can also join my Discord for the POB link. Also as well, if you haven't already, I'd heavily suggest leaving a like on the video, as it takes me a lot of time to work on stuff like this, a lot of time to theory craft stuff like this. I want to also mention there's also a person on YouTube that makes this build regularly. I can't remember his name right now, but I'll make sure to leave the link down below. He's been making this build for a few patches now. It's kind of funny. I started playing this build without even knowledge of his existence until someone noted it to me, so that's funny. But yeah, bye guys. We're going to go in game. All right, here we are in game and POB with the build. Like I said in the intro, this build is not finished. Like there's a lot of ways you could improve this build significantly. Like one of those ways being where you can dump the anoint for spiritual command, just grab it yourself, and then dump the forbidden flesh and flame for unholy authority, which gives us the +1 curse. And then you can grab Mastermind of Discord, and as you can tell, it gives us a lot of extra DPS. But of course, that's like a 10 divine jewel, and I haven't really wanted to buy it because I've been saving towards a Mage Blood. Now, the first question that I'm going to get asked is, why am I a Necromancer? The main reason we are a Necromancer is because the skill effect duration applies to our minion. So the way Mirror Arrow, Blink Arrow works is you shoot out a minion and they last for a duration. Now, we actually path towards a lot of extra duration in the tree. Like we get exceptional performance, skill duration here, the duration mastery. We grab this, right? Because it's a lot of extra skill effect duration. Now, of course, Necromancer has skill effect duration. It's one of the only classes, ascendancies to have skill effect duration, which means that we get longer amounts of, like, longer period times of mirror arrow blink arrows. And what does that mean? That means that we get more minions at once, right? Because we have no actual limit on our minions, right? We can keep casting as much as we want. We can make as many as we want as long as they last long enough, right? So we usually land around 20 of them. That's right now. You could have more if you invested more, if you elevated your boot cooldown recovery speed boots, stuff like that. But I haven't really moved into it because I haven't really needed to. That's like the thing with this build is I've invested about 80 divines so far, and that's about as much as you need. To be honest, I haven't really needed more. You can invest more to like make it do bossing and stuff like that, but I haven't needed it, so I haven't done it. But yeah, that's why we're a necromancer. Now, let's talk about the skills. And we have mirror arrow. Mirror arrow, of course, phantasmal with, of course, ashes of the stars, meaning we get a bunch of extra charges. Same thing with the blink arrow. They have the same exact 6 link, essentially. Eventually, we get awakened added elemental damage, and then, of course, awakened elemental focus. That would give you a bunch of damage. Now, I'm running predator instead of elemental penetration, and that's because I like having the button on my bar to focus down guards in the sanctum, and of course bosses, and of course beasts as well. So having predator support is way better than having elemental focus, in my humble opinion. Of course, predator actually makes your elemental shred in other places, like your resistance shred, like Mastermind of Discord as well, like I was saying, and like your elemental equilibrium. It makes it even stronger. So that's why we're going with predator support. Now, for other links right now in the gloves, we have Determination, Skitterbots, Vitality, Vol Haste. One of the things about this build is there aren't really many auras that actually benefit us. So that's why we're running like Vol Haste, some Skitterbots, and Determination. We were running an extra aura, like an Arctic Armor at one point, but it really wasn't worth my time. So I swapped out of the, of course, the Diadem and swapped into an Asenath's Mark instead. Now, to swap into the Asenath's Mark, you do need to have a blessing here with Eldritch Battery on it, otherwise your mana is going to be fucked. Now, you can go up here and just grab Eldritch Battery, grab the extra recoup, some jewel sockets and stuff like that, but that'll be for a later time when I play this build again. But yeah, that's why we only have 4 auras. There's not that many that actually benefit us. Now, in our helmet, we have Asenath's Mark. Makes it so we trigger socketed spell with a 0.3 second cooldown. This makes it so I don't have to press a bunch of buttons. This is a quality of life thing while in the Sanctum. One of the biggest problems in the Sanctum is for our offerings, right? We want to be able to have them up, but to have them up, we need to actually cast our offerings. We need to cast Desecrate as well, because there's not that many corpses in the Sanctum. So what I've done is I set up an Asenath's Mark with Divergent Flesh Offering, Desecrate, Eye of Winter, and Elemental Weakness. And of course, Eye of Winter is for Elemental Equilibrium, so that I can proc it for the negative 25 resistance for lightning, and eventually negative 50% when we swap to the Forbidden Flesh and Flame, which I plan to eventually. So yeah, that's why we have that specific setup in Asenath's Mark. It's really good in the Sanctum because like all I have to do is attack, and all of my buffs, my curses, everything's up except for, of course, my Wrath, my Sniper's Mark, my Signal Prey, which is great. And then next is the Wrath Sniper's Mark setup. I have a Divine Blessing and Inspiration. Eventually, when you get enough energy shield through enough investment, you can actually drop the Inspiration and go for a I think, what is it called? Generosity support. I've been having problems with mana, as you can tell. That's like one of the biggest problems. I actually have a bunch of jewels with energy shield regen on it, specifically because of mana problems, because we don't have that much energy shield. That could be fixed if you took a lot of these evasion bases and made them evasion energy shield bases. You could also go back to, of course, the diadem setup and shove in like a discipline. That works too. There's a lot of different ways of going about it, but this is mainly how I've been going about it. is using an inspiration. I haven't really needed the damage. And of course, Sniper's Mark is really strong. Of course, you should have 20 quality. I forgot to have 20 quality. And then of course, Bone Armor. Bone Armor was fixed. It used to be the fact that it would bug and it would come off your bar every single time you flip to a zone, but now it's fine. We also get a bunch of skill effectoration, meaning that our Bone Armor lasts forever. Our Wrath lasts like 25 seconds. Our Sniper's Mark lasts forever. Our Signal Prey lasts 18 seconds. So like we have a very large uptime on all of our skills thanks to all the skill effectoration scaling, which is really cool. Yeah, that's pretty much it for the skills. Now for the passives. The passive is pretty straightforward. We're mainly going down, grabbing skill effectoration. We want to grab elemental equilibrium. We have to grab this cluster so we can get the cooldown recovery rate on the mastery. There's no other bow node that's close by. That's why we have to go down here. So it's really nice, neat package over here. Of course, we're grabbing a cluster with increased minion attack speed and added passive effect, right? One of the most important things to have is Blessed Rebirth, so minions created recently cannot be damaged for the last 4 seconds, meaning that we don't have to care about minion survivability at all in most boss fights, which is great. And of course, I'm grabbing Enduring Composure for Endurance Charge Sustain. And grabbing an extra endurance charge. Now, another node that is very, very, very important, whether you anoint it or grab it on the tree, is Spiritual Command. And why is that? I can show you. Watch my attack speed when I have Spiritual Command, right? Look at that, instant, right? Now watch my attack speed. Oh shit, I don't have enough. I don't have enough. But like Spiritual Command, TLDR, it is a lot of extra attack and cast speed. It makes it so our castings like instant. Look at that. Our castings instant. Like we very much need Spiritual Command for the quality of life of the build. So either anoint it or grab it. Either way, you want to have that. That's very important. And that's pretty much it for the passives. Everything else is pretty self-explanatory. Now for the items. In the last video, I was running a diadem, and that's the setup you run until you have a Eldritch Battery relic, right? These aren't going for that much. It's like 7. It was 7 divines when I bought it. That wasn't that much for Eldritch Battery, which is great. The bow. This is essentially the bow that you want. Of course, instead of that cold res, it could be an extra arrow, and that attack speed could be better. But this is about as close as you can get to a good bow. And how do we make said bow? Well, what you do is you get a fractured bow with like T1 lightning damage, and then of course you then spam essences of fear, like deafening essences of fear for the minions increased damage because it's a really large roll on the bow. And of course you go for tier 1 fire damage. I don't have that. This bow could be significantly better, but it was really cheap to make, so whatever, right? You can eventually go for essenced lightning flat instead, but that's going to be much more investment focused, and I wouldn't do that until you get an explode bow. Make sure to have a suffix open so you can craft the minions attack and cast speed, because that's important as well. Now, for the bow specifically, the bow base doesn't matter as long as it has a high attack rate per second base, because we're just slapping on elemental damage anyways. We don't really care what kind of damage is on it. Eventually, like you could swap to like a thicket bow for even more attack speed. But essentially, you want like a thicket bow that's been synthed with explode on it. That would be like the best base. And of course, essence, lightning damage, T1 fire flat. You can do T1 cold flat if you want. It's not necessary, but you could do that. Or you could do minions deal increased damage. You could have increased attack speed, of course. You have an additional arrow as well, or 2 additional arrows if you're rich. And then, of course, minions have increased attack and cast speed. This is like the best bow. Now for the quiver, you want the flat added lightning damage to attacks. Like I said, your minions take your quiver and your bow. You could have a quiver with a +1 arrow, and they shoot an extra arrow. You can also use a Rigwalds for fork. I don't use fork, I use pierce. But of course, all of this is really good. I think they even get the increased damage with bow skills, I'm pretty sure. The flat accuracy helps as well, capping your accuracy, but mainly you really care about the +1 arrow. The broadhead arrow quiver is the best in slot because we want as much attack speed as possible. Like I said, it's a very cheap quiver. You could go much higher in expense. Now for the helmet, we're running an Assassin's Mark, mainly for quality of life. You can run a diadem, and then self-cast your stuff or use an Arcanist brand, but I like the Assassin's Mark. If I was not to run diadem and I was not to run Eldritch Battery, what I would do specifically is I would change my tree slightly. I would come up here, I would grab the recoup, make me tankier. I'd grab the life, and then I'd grab the Eldritch Battery, and then I'd grab the socket here. And then what that would mean that I wouldn't be in this area. I would be in this area instead. I think it's just as good. I think it's fine. I don't think there's that much of a difference. You can also come up here and anoint Whispers of Doom. And grab Whispers of Doom as well, and grab extra reservation efficiency. So you do not require the Eldritch Battery relic. You don't need it. You don't need a diadem, but it's definitely quality of life to have, of course, the relic. Now, of course, for the blessing, I really like enchant. I really like flesh offering attack speed because that affects us as well, because we get like 10% increased attack speed, and the faster we attack, the more quality of life we have. And of course, the regen is great as well because I'm actually using a Progenesis, and if you have a Progenesis, you need regen to make it work. So I have about, with the recovery rate from Necromancer specifically, I'm at like 700 life regen per second, which is a lot, and that on top of course the 36% increased recoup. And like I said, these nodes, I think this would be the superior option, to be honest with you. It's just I've already put Eldritch Battery on my relic, so like there's no point in going up here. But I think it would be the superior option to just go up into Eldritch Battery. But that's just my opinion. Now for the chest could literally be whatever you want. I just wanted an energy shield base so I could have enough energy shield to cast my Wrath. Yeah, this is really shit. You could do much better than me. Eventually, if you swap to a Mage Blood, you could run a Phasing Flask and then run like a bronze Dome or whatever for like max res or whatever. But it doesn't really matter what your chest is. Eventually, you could go like with a crafted one, like with like Explode or whatever. There's like a lot of different stuff you could do with it. Then for the ring, this is your best in slot ring. This is about what you're looking for. I wouldn't look for anything less than this. This is like, it was like 8 divines to buy this. To craft it, it might be even more. But yeah, and then of course I put the life and mana modifiers for extra life, and of course that affects the recoup as well. It goes from 15 to 18. My other ring isn't as crazy because it doesn't have the attack and cast speed. The movement speed's useless, so mainly this is the ring you want to follow. One of the biggest problems with this build is we require a lot of dex because of our bow base, because it requires 212 dex to put the bow on, which is a lot of dex. So getting dex everywhere is great. For Amulet, Ashes of the Stars, I can't really argue with this one. You wouldn't really want to try any other amulet, mainly because of the utility of getting the extra charges with Mirror Arrow, Blink Arrow. I really wouldn't go outside of this, right? And the mana reservation is great as well. And for the gloves, really cheap pair of gloves, just suppress, dex, life, stuff. You could do much better than this. The belt, was just like a Stygian Vise with some chaos res. I wanted to be positive chaos res. It's very simple. Eventually get regen. And of course for the boots, I bought the Fracture and I crafted it myself with Essences of Greed till I hit suppress and move until I had an open prefix for movement speed. Then of course I added on the increased cooldown recovery rate. Eventually you want to go for elevated. The reason why all of my gear is so cheap, by the way, is because I plan on moving into a Mage Blood, and there's no real point in me investing more into the character if I'm going to swap literally everything anyways. That's why my gear is so trash, by the way. And then for my flask, I just have instant recovery on low life. This saves you a bunch. This is like really good. Like this is a really good flask. And of course, armor, movement speed. Eventually we want a phasing flask. One of the biggest problems with this build is we have little access to phasing because we don't count as killing stuff, right? And of course, Progenesis is best in slot for a lot of different builds, right? Can't really complain about that. Essentially TLDR, it makes your regen into extra EHP, which is great. And of course, States of Hate, because we don't have that much physical damage reduction. We have a bit, we don't have that much. We have like endurance charges. We could go for more physical damage reduction. And that's why I went with Taste of Hate. If I get a Mage Blood, I'm actually legitimately thinking about running a phasing flask, a granite flask, a quicksilver flask, and then 2 unique flasks, and then just divining it for 3 flasks, just because of how strong Progenesis and Taste of Hate is. But if you wanted to dump the Taste of Hate and then run 4 utility flasks, that's definitely an option as well. But it's definitely on the table to just run 3 magic flasks with a Mage Blood. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the build. There's not really much else to talk about other than Relic, increased cooldown recovery rate. Not really much else you'd want. You don't need this. It's only like 0.96 to 0.88. You only lose 0.8 cooldown. It's not the end of the world. It's just quality of life. You could actually use like a suppress relic and it would be just as strong, or like extra endurance charge. There's a lot of different relics you could use. Now, with all that being said, thank you all for watching. Have a wonderful rest of the day.